now. Gemma Tognini from GT Communications joins me in the studio.
So
and
happy
Royal
to be
Report
here.
Host Caroline DeRusso in Perth. Lovely to see you both. Thank you so much for joining us.
Always time for you, Danica DiGiorgio.
Look, likewise for both of you. Look, let's get straight to it. We've got a lot to discuss today. So another sporting body has snubbed Australia Day, with Cricket Australia joining the Australian Open, dropping all references to January 26. Look, Gemma, when does this madness stop?
Well, I think it stops when people vote with their feet. When I write about these things in the Australian, the question I get asked most often is, what can I do and what can we do? Simply be heard. Simply be heard. Vote with your feet. I mean, I don't know what happened to these organisations that they generated such a ridiculous level of self-loathing. It doesn't make any sense. Woolworth's statement on the flag, for example, is like, oh, we wanted to be respectful for people for whom it's an offensive day or an upsetting day. Well, what about the 90% of people for whom it's not? My family arrived in Australia to begin their new life on the 26th of January, 1956, I think it was, 56. And that's a really important day for us. And I accept that other people don't share that view, but I'm not asking them to celebrate because I do.
No,
This
exactly.
this is one of the things that I think we need to tip the scales back to the place of balance. And Cricket Australia, well, you can put them in the bin as far as I'm concerned. A more woke, disconnected organisation I don't think you'll find.
Oh, look, it's extraordinary, isn't it, this decision today? And Caroline, the fans seem to be ignored when these sorts of decisions are made. I've got to say, let's hope people go to the cricket with their Aussie pride and waving the flags to stick it to Cricket Australia for making this pathetic decision.
Yeah, and knowing Australians, and particularly Australians at sporting events, you can kind of get the feeling something like that might just happen. What I find just totally outrageous about this whole thing is that cricket is a game that was brought to this country by the British. So you've got Cricket Australia, who are sitting on top of the colonialist and imperialist sport, not wanting to use the word Australia because of connotations in relation to, the First Fleet landing in Australia. I'm like, to me, it is so ridiculous. It is beyond satire, and yet here we are.
And yet here we are. That is exactly right. You're spot on, Caroline.
If you're a fan and you're going to the cricket this week, wear your stuff.
Absolutely.
Wear your Aussie Day stuff.
Why shouldn't you? Wear it with pride. Why should you be made to feel like you can't celebrate the day? It's just ridiculous. And look, it gets worse because preschoolers in some childcare centres are being taught that Australia was stolen, with some children told to sing or recite the land that belonged to Indigenous people. Gemma, now preschoolers are being made to feel ashamed.
Well, this is just genuinely pretty concerning stuff. I remember preschool very distantly, but also very differently. And this is a values-based decision, and one can only assume that the parents who are sending their kids to these preschools are okay with it. Because if they're not, the first thing you do is take your kid out of that environment and find another alternative. I do know that in some regional parts of Australia, there aren't alternatives. In the Central Coast, I'm still a new Sydney sider, but still in the Central Coast, I have friends who've got children in that area. Not a lot of choice. But if you can't take your kid out of that environment, you make yourself heard to these people, particularly if it's a private organisation. This is just social engineering in the... Who wants to fill children with that kind of shame and guilt when it's a particular view of history?
Correct.
And it's not a view... And we know this from the Voice debate, that just as there is no homogenous view, for example, amongst Italians from the north to the south, there will be a variety of different views. There is no homogenous view amongst Indigenous Australians about that time.
No.
So this is a massive assumption on that basis alone, and it's just a bloody horrible thing to have kids start saying. What an awful way to have children, spend their time at daycare.
It's indoctrination. It is absolutely. I mean, Caroline, why should kids be brought into these culture debates?
Well, they shouldn't. And really, that should be the beginning, middle and end of it. We then start talking about... We were also concurrently having these conversations about children in kindy and primary school suffering from anxiety and other mental health kind of concerns. Well, how is that helped by 3 and 4-year-olds being told that they've stolen something, or they're living on land that's been stolen from something, that their existence isn't the way that it is meant to be? If you start kids that early, you cannot be surprised when they start to have mental health issues and other anxieties later in their childhood. And then the other issue, think about something, say, like our Defence Forces. We keep having this conversation about why can't we fill the quotas that we need every single year for people for our Defence Forces. Well, if kids have been brought up their entire lives to be told that the country they come from is a horrible place, the people in it are horrible, you've done all these bad things, well then why would you want to go and fight and die for your country?
Well, you wouldn't. You absolutely wouldn't.
No.
That's a fair point. Let's move on now, because pro-Palestine protests in Sydney's CBD are costing taxpayers $220,000 a week, with police forced to pay 250 officers overtime just to keep an eye on things. Gemma, that's an extraordinary amount of money.
I say send them the bill.
Absolutely.
I mean, seriously, just send them the bill. They're entitled to protest, but they are not entitled to protest in such a way that the behaviour of the people attending is a security threat to people going to work, going to do their shopping, business owners in the city, and indeed police themselves. So I think that would be a pretty strong way to weed out, the weeds from the chaff, in the sense that they don't want to put their money. They can put their money where their mouth is.
Yep.
And we have seen the calibre of these protests, and we're looking at some of them on screen now. The absolute hatred and violence, and frankly, it's behaviour that the people who flee war-torn countries come to Australia because that is not the Australian way, and yet here we are seeing it. And I make no mistake. I don't make no apology for saying that. Again, everybody knows I'm the child of a migrant, and my grandparents fled post-war Italy to make a better life, and hundreds of thousands of Australian families have a similar story from countries all over the world.
Of course.
We don't want that on our streets.
We don't want to see it.
So if it's costing $200,000, send them the damn bill.
Absolutely. Make a user pay system. They can pay for it themselves. I want to move on to the US now, because we've seen today Ron DeSantis has pulled the plug on his presidential campaign, throwing his support behind Donald Trump. Here he is earlier on social media.
Trump is superior to the current incumbent, Joe Biden. That is clear. I signed a pledge to support the Republican nominee, and I will honor that pledge. He has my endorsement because we can't go back to the old Republican guard of yesteryear.
So, Caroline, this is now a 2-horse race between Donald Trump and Nikki Haley. How do you see this playing out?
Look, I think it'll be really interesting. The New Hampshire primaries, which are next, and there's the system's a little bit different over there. Other people can vote, independents can vote. So it'll be really interesting to see what actually happens. She's a bit over 10 points behind. So I think New Hampshire, Nikki Haley might still do okay. The question is what happens after that point. And I think that Ron DeSantis just read the room early. And look, it's always good to see a politician who recognises when a sunk cost is enough and doesn't go with the fallacy of throwing good money after bad. These campaigns are extraordinarily expensive to run. So kudos to him for calling it early. Yes, Nikki Haley's not that far away at this point vis-a-vis Donald Trump, but it'll be really interesting to see what happens after that point. Because I think there is South Carolina after that, or maybe it's North Carolina.
Yeah, well, look, you know what, it's going to be fascinating, but it seems that the Trump juggernaut just cannot be stopped, really, at this point. Gemma Tognini from GT Communications, Royal Report host Caroline DeRusso. Great to speak with you both. Thank you so much for joining us.
I will see you again sometime, Dee.
You know it. Thank you.